Hashtag cancelconor. Here we go. Bang rang. So, Gandhi, Ivan Smith. What's going on, man? How you been?
Oh, doing well, thanks.
That's good to hear. Usually I always like to start this, just everybody gives a little bit of their background and where they came from, how we met, kind of thing like that, or whatever. And a Frank.
And the dog, yes. Sure. Yeah, I mean, I can maybe just give an intro and then can go through there. So, so Ivan Smith. So basically, my background really was been born and raised in Calgary. So spent most of my life here, about 39 years, pretty close to. A few years in the States, and then I've traveled around a little bit, but not too much. I was mostly just based here. So most of my life been really involved with a lot of different, I guess, technology initiatives, as you know. So my background is mostly in IT, doing either infrastructure or programming development or management, IT management, those types of things. So I mean, I would say like it was kind of always just like a nerdy hobby for me as a kid. And then as I got older, it became kind of more something that people were looking for that was in demand. You have to remember back when I started with computers, it was really like me and maybe a couple of my friends that had them, and everybody else was sort of not doing anything with them at all. So yeah, it's interesting to see how things have changed and times that it hasn't evolved. But that sort of led me into working in artificial intelligence and then data science, I guess. So
yeah, and that's I know. Well, for me, as I'm very not tech savvy, and I basically grew up a step up from the pioneers. I think not even really joking, but it seemed like for myself that when I got into high school and we got a little bit into computers, we had Windows like 3.2, and I upgraded to Windows 95. Like but then a few years passed, and it felt like I skipped an entire generation of technology, or it passed me by, because it's like, is it evolving that fast, or am I just that out of the loop, sort of thing like that? And and getting to talk to people like you that have been basically post-secondary, kept on to the IT stuff, and live in a world that I don't even fucking understand, which is kind of cool too, because it's, your most recent job, at least anyways, with autonomous machinery is just mind-blowing. And it's like, holy crap, that's already like beyond a level that I even thought that we'd be ready for, kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
yeah, I mean, times have obviously changed. I used to, when I was a kid, spent time talking to my dad about things like autonomous tractors, for example, right?
Yeah.
In those days, it was all mostly just like moonshot stuff, because the technology really didn't exist. But then, working for Nutria in particular and agriculture, you can kind of see how a lot of those technologies have evolved and matured. And now, they're actually deploying these things and they run, and you can see like autonomous tractors out in the field that have nobody at the stick. So yeah, I mean, the world's changed quite a bit, just in the last 15 years. But I just see it becoming more and more, I think, kind of prominent as time goes on. You'll see more people using like autonomous systems and that play more of an integral role, I think, coming into the future as well. So yeah.
Yeah, well, it makes sense too, because I mean, every time we have a step up in technology, it's the existing generation that's working on those things. It seems they're the ones that get screwed over. Mm-hmm. But for every generation after, everybody's life becomes easier.
Yeah.
But it's not at the expense of something. But I mean, progress is always going to make something happen and it's not always going to be beneficial for everybody. But with that said, over the span of time, like you always make the idea, it's like, nobody wanted to get rid of the library until they realized how awesome the internet was, or
that's right.
Like it's kind of that idea, right? So
yeah, I mean, that's kind of the current trend right now, is that like a lot of this stuff is just sort of a fad, right? And like it'll go away, but it's definitely not, right? I think it's here to stay, and it is the future as far as I can tell. I've been in this business long enough to be able to tell what's up. So
yeah, well, that's I think arguably a good thing. I mean, we're creating different problems that we don't really understand, but I mean, if we can make our lives easier through technology, and we have the capability to make lives easier for lots of stuff, we should, right? I mean, that's also the reason, I mean, we can also see it going a little too far when it gets to something like agriculture, where it's like, we're really, really good at this now. It's like, okay, but do we need 25 billion chickens? You know, do we need all the beef that we're producing? Like, we got really good at it, but maybe we need to pump the brakes now.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So yeah, definitely, I think there's opportunities for slowing down or making mistakes, I guess, and getting it right. But I think it's sort of genie's out of the bottle, right, at this point. So it's not going back in. These are things that are coming, one way or the other.
Pandora doesn't go back in the box, man.
Yeah. So it's like anything else, like any technology. We just kind of learn how to navigate it, and then it becomes industrialized. And from there, people reap the benefit of it.
Yeah.
But it has to be done safely, and I think that the controls are all there, like, to prevent that. And it's just kind of a misconception. I think a lot of people get their ideas about how the future of this technology is going to look from Hollywood, which is a lot of like Terminator, Matrix type stuff, where the machines start taking over. But the reality is, like, self-thinking machines are still a long ways out. But all the things that we're talking about, applications for narrow artificial intelligence is what it's called, are really hugely going to change, I think, the fabric of the way that we do things, but not in the way that you think. It's not going to be, machines as equivalents in intelligence to people, but they're going to be used to abstract us away from a lot of the redundant, repetitive, work that gets done in offices and companies today, right? So that's for sure coming. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, but I mean, is that also something that we're just going to slowly give in more and more power to AI and stuff like that before we realize it's like, oh, it kind of controls everything?
Yeah, but to a large degree, like, we're already there in a lot of different ways, like electrical systems, if you think of like process control systems, things like that, in a smaller way already do that, right? Like, who controls the power that's going in your house? Most of that is just some automated system that somebody wrote software for, right? So, like, in the sense that, like, we're dependent on technology, I think that we've kind of already crossed that bridge, at least, information technology, like, we're pretty much totally dependent on it.
Yeah.
But I think that, like with everything else, we'll just find ways to make it redundant or sort of bulletproof, so that we don't run into situations where the system crashes and people can't get gas into their houses, for example. So I think the same will apply to, like, AI, in a sense that, like, the person's always going to be involved. Like, the human in the loop thing is always, I think, going to be there. It's just the machines do all the work to make abstract you away from all the low-level decision making, and you're only ever making decisions on the information that you're receiving at a much higher level. So that's where I think a lot of this is going.
Yeah, and yes, I think that it makes sense for the mechanical parts of our lives, where, like, you have the functional things like heating our homes or powering them or whatever sort of thing like that. But then there's the other side of it, where something like social media has actually gotten so good at stealing our attention that it's becoming an addiction for a lot of people.
Yeah,
so
that's a great point. Yeah, I mean, and that's part of the pitfalls that I was talking about earlier. So like, as we sort of uncover, it's sort of like the Wild West, right? I mean, you have people sort of figuring these algorithms out that can do interesting things with human psychology, and we're seeing kind of the negative aspects of how that can be commercialized. But I think, like everything else, regulation will catch up. So eventually, governments will say, you're not allowed to use the algorithm in these ways. Just like you do, like they have in the medical community now. You can't do like genetic engineering, for example. We have like laws that prevent experimentation or adoption of that type of thing or technology into society. So it'll be the same thing. It's just policymakers are slow at understanding this stuff. So
like watching Congress talk to Zuckerberg. Fuck, that was funny.
That's right. And that's a classic example, right? So like Cambridge Analytica is the other one. So they're using this information, like weapons of mass destruction, in the sense that they can change the way that information gets disseminated into cultures, and they can warp perspectives based on that. But eventually, policymakers, countries, governments will catch up, and they'll just say, well, you can't do that anymore, it's outlawed. So it's coming for sure. It's just
and I suppose that's going to be, well, that's human nature, I guess, for a lot of it too, is that nothing really changes until it's gone too far.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, we can't do that anymore. But
yeah,
it's like, well, then how many innocent people get their lives destroyed because of some program that happened, or some way of doing business was, or an autocracy was run a certain way, or it's like, well, or the Eastern countries that have these so-called democracies, but they're still winning with a 99% landslide. It's like, that doesn't seem very democratic to me.
Yeah, that's right, and that's because they're using this technology in a sort of a negative way, or in the sense that you're giving too much power to one person to be able to warp the perception of a vast number of people, which you could never really do before. I mean, they've always had propaganda, but this is almost different in the sense that you can target specific demographics with specific messaging to point them in a specific direction you want them to go, and that's never really existed until Facebook, Cambridge Analytica was able to get that data at scale. So
yeah, that's true, because propaganda has been really well understood, and with the importance of radio and newsprint and then television. And it's like, wow, we can actually really educate people, but it's like we can also shape minds the way we want.
Yeah,
is the other part. And then then the advent of the internet and AI, and it's like, well, we can really get their attention now. And then something like the social credit score thing that they're doing in China.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
where it's like basically all your life has become digital now, and it's like, well, if you say the right things, or you protest or put the right propaganda up on your feed, or say the right things, or friends with the right people, it's like your groceries are going to get cheaper.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, okay, well, that sounds good, but do I have to sell my soul just so I can get a burger?
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. And so those are kind of the Orwellian aspects to the misuse of the technology, right? So government overreach is definitely one where we're in danger of that in this country too. Was it Bill C-51? Is that the one? The internet regulation. So so they want to say that government can control what individual content creators like yourself with this podcast can put out there, and if someone in government doesn't like what you're saying, they can basically close it down, or come after you individually for doing that. So there's definitely some potential for overreach, with so much information out there. Basically now you have it's not just broadcast companies that can make a difference, it's individual contributors, right? It's just now they have a platform through which to voice their opinion, whereas before government kind of just ignore them, right? So
well, I kind of wonder about that too, and this is going to be me throwing my tinfoil hat on. Yeah. But at the same token though too, like every time there's a good collective consciousness, or people are getting together without the control of a government, the government does something to instill fear in us, so that we go into our little tribes or get angry at each other instead of working together like we were doing well at. And one of the easiest examples I think is like in the 60s and start of the 70s, when the whole hippie movement was happening, and everybody's actually just getting along, and it's like, why do we need to fight so much? And things are actually starting to understand, like, oh, maybe this isn't what we need to be doing. And then JFK gets assassinated, John Lennon gets shot in the back, and it's like, what are we doing? And I understand that's like a 17-year gap between those two people being murdered, but I mean, in that time between 1963 and 1980, there was a lot of people that were really trying to work together and stuff like that, and really started to understand that maybe we don't have to do everything out of fear all the time. Maybe we can work together and actually, participate with each other's ideas. And then things got shitty, and cocaine got really big in the 80s, and that created a new problem. And then war on drugs was its own thing from the whole Nixon administration, and then everybody's at each other again and afraid of a bunch of stuff, and then things start getting better again, and then internet shows up and then we start attacking each other again, and then now everybody starts getting together, well, more recently, and this is absolutely the tinfoil hat part, but I mean, the world has changed, and then we're all, supposed to stay away from each other and be afraid of each other again. Mm-hmm. So, like, I understand that what it sounds like, but at the same token, though, too, it almost seems like a parent figure that's continually trying to get control of their kids. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, the government's not our parents, and we're not kids.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
And it's kind of interesting because, I mean, with all of this technology now, how much more power can they take from us?
Yeah, I mean, and like, they're making the regulations about who gets to use what, but notice they're not making any rules for themselves, right? So
yeah,
for sure, like, there's some opportunities for government to misuse the technology, particularly what you're talking about, which is the divisive aspect of it. So how do we set people, specific demographics that we want, that we like, to be more aligned with our particular messaging, and like the tools that we're talking about, the algorithms we're talking about, the perfect way to do that. So that's where I see these bills that come in as being like potentially quite dangerous, because if the Liberal government decides that they don't like your messaging in the sense that it goes against their mandate or their messaging, then they can silence you, right? So like, more regulation in that sense isn't a good thing. It's more like, to me, what they need to regulate is the underlying algorithms, right? So they should say, no one can use this type of technology, like similar to like subliminal messaging, right?
Yeah.
So that technology's been around since the 60s or 50s probably. Mm-hmm. And at some point, they decided that it wasn't ethical, and then they banned it. So it'll be similar, I think, with these platforms. It's just there's too many people making too much money off it, and it's too beneficial for too many people that it probably shouldn't be. And it's going to take some time for that. I think for people to kind of wake up and realize they need to make some fundamental changes to the laws around censorship in general.
Well, and there is always some level of overwatch. It seems like when some things become too large, and like we had talked about how Microsoft was really doing amazing on laptops and changing the way we use computers, and they had a ton of innovation, and then they started getting into the smartphone industry, and it's like, well, now you guys are taking too much of the market, so
yeah.
And it's like, I didn't really understand. It's like, well, why would they just get out of the phone game? They seem to be doing well. Mm-hmm. It's like, because they're taking too much, and nobody's allowed to have a monopoly, or not supposed to, at least, anyways.
Yeah, like antitrust laws, I mean, that's kind of the whole idea, is prevent monopolies, but I mean, they're, like, again, it's, the companies with money that are able to lobby against government are able to prevent or slow that down significantly. So you saw it with Microsoft throughout the 90s, and then antitrust laws, I think, came into place in the early 2000s. And that really kind of just paved the way for companies like Apple to get a much bigger market share, because government basically said you can't do that, and they basically assigned a slice of the pie to smaller businesses at the time, which were like Apple. So yeah, I mean, I think who controls the data is gonna sort of control the futures in a lot of ways. So that's why you see companies like Amazon really positioning themselves as kind of the biggest player in the game, or the only game in town, I guess. And I kind of foresee similar things unfolding for them probably in the next decade, where their government's really going to step in at some point and bring in some antitrust litigation against them. I think they already have, but likely you'll see some of that litigation come to fruition in the next decade, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and it seems like Google kind of just slipped underneath all of that, because they seem to have way more control and shares of stuff that, than most companies, but nobody really seems to think that Google's any more than just a search engine sometimes, because it's like, don't they kind of own like a third of the planet though? Yeah, I mean, Google, it's kind of it's similar, I think, similar territory. I mean, the difference is that like Amazon kind of deals more on the like the infrastructure side. I'm thinking more like their AWS offerings.
And they do so in the retail space as well, you know, like that's kind of been their whole sort of mode of operandi for the last little while is, you know, eat up as much market share in the retail space, but it's similar in every other space that they operate in. And, you know, you can do that for a while, but eventually, you know, I think people complain and then government listens eventually, and then you see those regulations start to trickle in. So it goes a little bit better at sort of staying under the radar. You know, I think they're one of the only companies that hasn't really been, you know, brought forward as, you know, someone that's been egregiously, I guess, ignoring the rules, but, you know, eventually I'm sure they're going to be brought to task as well.
Yeah, well, that makes sense too, because I mean, when we're talking about large businesses and stuff, they're entities, they're not people. You know, like, so having kind of open and free information and stuff like that is, to a degree, I think, important, but that's also a slippery slope in itself too, because it's like, well, it's okay for business, but what if we go right down to, from all the way like massive corporations to like everybody's small business.
Yeah.
It's like, well, it barely got off the ground. It's like, doesn't matter. Open your books up and show everybody what you're doing. It's like, well, do you want to get into my personal finances? Is because it's like my business is that small where I'm the only person doing it.
Yeah.
So it's like you're prying into my life now.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of where the slippery slope gets to the point where it's like, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, you should have nothing to hide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To which it's like, that's not the fucking point.
Yeah, that's right.
Because, yeah, when people are given that kind of power, it's like, how often do they abuse it? Every fucking time.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's where you see, like, you know, government overreach, like, well, how much is too much, you know?
Yeah.
Like, you can be on the total opposite end of the spectrum and think that, you know, the market's going to balance itself. You see a lot of proponents of in the U.S. and, like, people will just regulate themselves. But, I mean, I think you can kind of, you look through it, like, the history kind of tells you, you know, how that plays out, right? I mean, like, you know, Rockefeller's, Microsoft, whatever example you want to look at, when these, you know, entities become so big that they're almost bigger than government, you know, like they typically don't operate in a very ethical way. And I don't think it's really any one person's fault. Like, you try to think of it, you know, a company as being some evil monopoly guy, you know, sitting at the top of his, you know, pyramid, smoking cigars and whatever else. But the reality is just people enable that, right, through their labors typically within the company, because they don't want the company to fail. But, you know, eventually government has to come in and say, well, you can play within these, you know, you can do that within a certain set of rules, but once you get to a certain size, or, you know, things start happening that don't look like they're too ethical, and they have to come in and change, you know, the way that business operates. So I think there is some role of government in that, and I think the U.S. missed the mark there, and I think that's why you're seeing a lot of, you know, problems stateside these days with, you know, inequality of wealth and, you know, inequality of opportunity and other things as well. So.
Well, that's actually a kind of a messy, larger one though too, because there's also personality that gets tied into a lot of that sort of thing too, because there's going to be people that are going to strive and drive harder for certain things than other people, or some people have to be followers. They can't lead. They don't want to. They're not good at it. Kind of the other thing too. So, well, actually, when we're talking to Mantis about this, it was the same idea that, let's say we leveled the entire playing field. Everybody starting like 2022, let's say, everybody has $10,000.
Right.
By the start of 2023, I can kind of guarantee you that there's going to be some people that are millionaires and some people that are absolutely destitute.
Yep, for sure.
It's just it's human nature. It's going to happen, right? So.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be outliers, I think, either way. Like, you can definitely level the playing field so that you don't have these huge imbalances, right? Yeah. So, like, how much money is enough money that one person, you know, should make? Like, I mean, you look at some of these guys, like Sam Scotiamin, he's the CEO of Nissan. Okay. For, I believe that's his name, for the, you know, the better part of a decade anyway. So the guy's making like $40 million a year, you know, so it's basically like 400 times what your average worker would get paid. I mean, is there really any one point where someone brings in 400 times more value? Yeah, so I mean, I'm kind of, I mean, okay, like 10x, maybe 20x. Like this guy is, bringing a lot more value to the company, but 400 times, yeah. So I think there's an imbalance there, right?
Yeah, like once you make $1 billion, that's like you win. You won life, you won business, whatever.
Yeah, exactly, right? So I mean, I think, and I get that compensation is really just a function of competition and how much a company is willing to pay to get those expertise. I understand that, but at the same time, like, if the company is so invested in like specific individuals because they, have the right connections, whatever it is, to bring in the value, then there's something wrong in the way that power dynamic works, right? So
yeah,
I think like there is some opportunity, I think, to change the way that those kind of capitalist markets work so that they're a little more fair. But at the same time, I don't think we should disincentivize people that are, really trying to strive to better themselves, right? So there's a fine balance there. Like, you don't want to take away the incentive to the point where, no one's motivated to do anything, but at the same time, like, it shouldn't be a function of someone else being destitute, right? Or really just working crazy hours, just to get by, because all of the money is being funneled into certain individuals at the top. That's just my thought on it.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I mean, luckily that we live in Canada, so our minimum wage is a livable wage for the most part.
Yep.
But I know we're very lucky to live in and be born and raised in this country because we can have a lot more opportunity just being here than a lot of other people in just about almost anywhere in the world.
Yep.
But with that said though too, it's not that everything's easy for any of us. A pair of white men sitting around talking, but at the same time though too, it's like we still have to work though. It's not like shit is just handed to us either.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. And I mean, it's good that we have better opportunity, we have functional technology that makes life easier, sort of stuff too, but I think at the same token there's a lot that can be optimized.
Right.
I think because there's ways of doing things that it's like, well, we've just done this forever. So okay, but is that the only thing we can do? Is it going to cost us a metric fuck ton of money to make things better, or is it like, well, when I was working at the one of the NMAX power plants, and they're burning natural gas and heating its water, and it's a pretty neat system, and it has virtually, like, its carbon footprint is tiny. But I'm looking at it and I'm kind of asking questions. It's like, well, if you're buying water from a different part of the same company, I mean, I understand that maybe you need that cash flow back and forth to actually help stimulate economy and sort of thing too, but I mean, what the other part of it being is that you're just letting exhaust into the sky. Like, can't you capture that already heated water and put it back into the system? Like, isn't that alone, like, saving energy and water costs? And then, starting to ask these questions about this, and, well, I don't know. And then couldn't you put a higher output if you had like a larger turbine system that's getting pushed because you're actually capturing it as it goes down, you're using gravity to actually help spin another turbine?
Yeah.
And then you can have power for, maybe even if it's only 10,000 more homes. I mean, one of those plants that I was working at was 300,000 homes I think they were producing power for. The guy's like, oh, it does that much? It's like, you run this place, right? It's like, well, it kind of runs itself. We're just here to make sure it doesn't go, like, nothing goes wrong, really.
Right.
And it's like, oh, right. Again, and then that was me being, a guy that fucking swings a hammer all day, not really thinking. It's like, oh, right. This is actually way out of my depth. I mean, I could have maybe a few ideas, but to say that I know anything about it, how this system actually works, is kind of laughable. Because it's so technologically advanced, and, well, I'm even thinking that when you hit a switch, they need to already be making that power so that it's ready for you. So it's just like the way that they have to balance systems and how power intake changes throughout the day, and how much it has to regulate, and then how the grid has to tie into every other city, and all the grid is connected so that if there's a failure, that it all kind of works together. And it's just like I start thinking more and more about this, and it's like, maybe I should not talk or whatever, just ask more questions about how this works. Cause
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, it's hard to have an opinion. You don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
So to really have a solid opinion, you really kind of have to know the whole thing inside and out. Definitely, it's not always cut and dry as you see from the outset. But yeah, I mean, I think, like your point about sort of leveraging those ideas, I guess, it's always good to have an outside opinion sort of giving you that feedback, because sometimes you also get myopic, right? Like,
yeah,
if you're so deep into the problem, thinking about all the nuances, you kind of miss the bigger picture, and sometimes it just takes somebody that doesn't know, all the details to say, well, why aren't you doing it like this? And then you kind of think, well, yeah, big picture, maybe it makes more sense. We should be shifting, things to do that, right? So
yeah.
I think there's value in both. You kind of need both, I guess, to get the right answer. But, yeah.
Yeah, well, I guess that kind of makes sense too, because even backtracking a bit, because we were talking about how capitalism is good, but it's like if it has an air of socialism to it, to kind of make it fair and even, so it's not just, because I mean, the States is a great example of capitalism going kind of too far.
Yeah. Because
it gets to the point where even medical care is kind of falling by the wayside, because it's like, well, let's see if you can afford this first.
Yeah.
Well,
exactly,
are we supposed to be taking care of the people?
Yeah. So I mean, I've got opinions about that. I've talked about them. I think like if you're in a government, having a government in some sense is like putting some responsibility on the collective to look after, details that affect people's lives. So I think healthcare definitely falls under that umbrella. I mean, the States has sort of moved away from that with the privatized healthcare system.
Yeah.
In the spirit of competition, I guess. But to me, it's it's just a fundamental function of government, right, to look after those things. So you pay tax. That's kind of the expectation, is that you're going to get looked after if you get sick or something happens, right? So it's almost like insurance.
Yeah. Well, and the issue with making something like healthcare capitalist, though, is that people are going for the money, not for the care of people.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, and in here that we get socialized medicine, and we don't directly pay for it anyways, and without question you get help, but because it's fair and even, you gotta kind of wait sometimes too.
Yeah.
I mean, again, like anything, if you have enough money, you don't wait in lines.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think that's right. Well, I mean, I think that what they've probably done right is they're attracting the top talent, to be able to, and they have the resources, I guess, to fast track or make those systems efficient, right? Whereas like with our system, it's mostly a function of like seniority and bureaucracy, I guess, that people get into certain positions. So I think like we could certainly run the system more efficiently, I think, by leveraging some ideas that come out of the capitalist, I guess, healthcare system. But at the same time, like, who pays for that really, I think, should be just kind of a function of government rather than, individual responsibility, because, you just create these rifts and level of healthcare, I guess, right? Which to me is not a good thing, but that's the way they do things there. I mean, not to be a huge critic of the States, but that's just, I guess, how their systems evolved through the free market capitalist ideologies they have there.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, well, I mean, it can be good in a lot of senses too. I mean, even in the sense that when you're working for all that money, and it's just like, even when you have charitable stuff like that, and it's like, well, that's just a tax write-off. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, okay, but they're still giving money to charity.
Right.
So don't discount what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yes, there's benefit for them doing it on both sides, and more often than not, I mean, they make a big press conference. It's like, oh, look at this company. They gave $10 million to a hospital or something. It's like, yeah, but they got a wing named after them, and they get specialized care from that company in their own wing, and sort of thing too. But I mean, at the same time, it's like, well, I built a hospital. I think I deserve a bit of special treatment, don't I?
Right.
Right. So it's just, and that's the other thing too. Is like, well, where does the morality lie on that then too? Because it's like, well, yeah, I am trying to do the right thing, but it's like I'm doing it somewhat selfishly too.
Yeah.
Like, I can't be completely altruistic.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like that. I don't know, Jordan Peterson talks about the sort of equal outcomes versus equal opportunity, right? So I think like you can should be able to guarantee kind of a base level of service for everybody, meaning that like, if I get sick, I'm going to get help. At the same time, like if I have the resources to get better help, should I be prevented from doing that? And it's kind of like, well, probably not, right? Like if you have somebody that wants to achieve more, I mean, they should probably be rewarded through some benefit. If that benefit happens to be like better care in some regards, maybe that's not a terrible thing. But the standard that's set for like what people receive as a baseline, I think, should be kind of universal in a lot of ways. Like, you might be able to get a little bit better, maybe probably not a lot worse, but there should be, it should be pretty finite in terms of like the standard of quality of care that you get, I guess.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, and like you say too, I mean, with the idea of rewarding sort of thing too, I mean, well, I guess Elon Musk would be a great example of that kind of thing too, where he's a billionaire and he has no problem throwing money into terrible ideas.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, if somebody doesn't do this though, it's not going to happen.
That's right.
So it's like, if I don't start making electric vehicles a viable thing, nobody else is going to do it because they've been trying since the 80s.
Yeah.
Nobody's really done it, but he's like, I've done it.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, it's not just him, obviously. He's got committees and all kinds of people that he needs to talk to, and he doesn't, twist wrenches himself and build every car, obviously. Yeah. But I mean, at the same time, it's not just that. I mean, he made PayPal. I mean, that was one of the big things that he made his money on. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, well, I've made regular, everyday people that can't get credit and stuff like that still able to do internet purchasing.
Yeah.
I think that's a great way to level the field.
Yeah.
And then you look at the Boring Company. It's a terrible idea. Like he said it himself. It's like drilling holes in Los Angeles where there's 52 fault lines over top of each other. It's a bad idea to drill holes there.
Yeah.
But it's like, again, if I don't do it, nobody's going to.
That's right.
So he has no problem sinking money into things that are actually the betterment of mankind. Mm-hmm. And I agree, he's somebody that should be rewarded. I mean, he deserves to be a billionaire.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so and that's kind of my thought thinking too. Like he took some enormous risks.
Yeah.
Spent a lot of hours basically, understanding these things. Basically, I guess the jury's kind of out on why he did it, but I'm pretty sure, like based on the things that he invests in, like he does it for unselfish reasons. Like he does it just because he really wants to see people go to Mars, right?
Yeah.
Or he does it because he really wants to see like efficiencies in transit or things like this. Like he just wants to change the world. And I think a lot of people, when they get to sort of those positions of power, don't necessarily do it for those reasons, right? Like they do it because they want to make money or less, I guess, altruistic like reasons behind them. So
yeah, because once you make $1 billion, it's like, well, I can have $2 billion, though, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so
yeah, but I mean, again, with his technology too, getting into the whole Neuralink thing, and then okay, well, now are we kind of talking Ghost in the Shell sort of thing at this point? Because now can we actually make AI that good? We can wipe somebody's memory and put a different person inside their brain now. Because that's kind of the interesting. That's actually one other thing I wanted to talk to you about is Neuralink a good idea in your opinion?
Yeah, so is it a good idea? I think it is, in the sense that, it kind of removes you from, basically using these digits to try to punch in ideas into your keyboard to get things done, right? So if you had a neural link, it would be a lot easier, more efficient to do things like order your dinner, or like, send an email, stuff like that.
Yeah. So
I think, again, it's this question of like, what are the limits of the technology and what gets regulated? I mean, to me, that should be sort of the extent of it. Like the Neuralink just acts as an extension of your senses and your physical, arms, legs, things like that. To be able to interact with computing systems, I think that's a good idea. I think, the bad ideas are probably, being able to like install software, I guess, into your brain in a sense. So like, I could just upload Kung Fu, and now all of a sudden I know Kung Fu.
Yeah.
The reason I'm saying that isn't necessarily just, I guess the security or health risks associated with it. It's also just, I think, negative for like human experience, right? Like if you can't go through the motions to some degree and like learn these things, you know, the hard way, I think you're kind of missing out on part of the experience. I think that makes it worthwhile to do those things. So
Yeah.
it's kind of I mean, I guess I'm still jury. I guess for me is still out
Yeah.
a little bit on the benefits, but
Well, and that's actually, well, in itself an irony, because I am of two minds, having a second mind in my mind. Because it's like, I think it's a great idea in the sense of things like that. Like I want to, like you say, type an email. It's like, well, my cumbersome fingers are way slower than me just thinking about what I want to say, and it's gone.
Yeah, exactly.
Sort of thing. I mean, it's a great idea for lots of things. But with that said, though, too, it's just like, well, what are the downsides of, plugging your brain into a massive computer? But maybe that's a good thing, because now we're interconnected in a way we've never been before, where we can evolve with a greater either hive mind, if some people want to be a part of a hive mind, or the fact that our technology is superseding our ability to even understand it half the time. So it's like we have to integrate with it so we actually evolve together. And that's, I think I've actually talked about that dream I had about like what the Matrix could be in the future, sort of thing like that, like a Matrix 5 sort of thing, which, but I mean, it's that idea. It's like, like we're evolving, and every time we pass the next step of what life or existence is, it gets harder and harder to be the next step. I mean, you go from inorganic life to, or like simple organics sort of thing like that, to proteins, to single-celled life, to complex life, to super complex life, to sentient life. But it's like, now we were kind of stalling here. So it's like, do we need to actually meld with machinery so that we can evolve into the next thing, so we can actually be a intergalactic kind of species?
That's a good point. I mean,
so
that's a great point.
So I find it has like a lot of great potential, and that's me wanting to see like a lot of my sci-fi dreams come true. But
again, it's one of these things like, how do you regulate it or make sure that it can't be abused or turn it, and like everything else, once the genie's out of the bottle, you know, potential for that, it's always going to be there. So I put it at the same level as like, you know, things like genetic engineering, right? Like, it's kind of viewed as this negative thing because it's going to turn us into, I don't know if you've seen the movie Gattaca. Okay, so where everybody, you know, essentially just has to, you know, be genetically engineered to do anything. But I think the reality is like, if used properly, it's a huge benefit. All of a sudden, like, you get rid of all genetic diseases, right? Like genetic disorders. I mean, I don't think anyone, I mean, maybe some people would, but, you know, in general, wouldn't really argue that getting rid of diseases caused by genetic abnormalities is a bad thing. So, you know.
And well, that's always an interesting one too, because it's like, well, let's get rid of like all kinds of stuff, because there's more good that could be gained at it than we realize. It's like, but people with sickle cell anemia, which disproportionately affects black people, is kind of shitty. But because of that, they have a harder time getting malaria.
All right.
So it's just like, maybe we need some of these shitty things in our life until we can figure out how to do these other things ourselves, sort of thing too. But with that said, I mean, where does that line get drawn then too? Or is it a line, or is it just kind of a nebulous area that we kind of try to work in? Because
I think it's like, I mean, personal choice, I think, has to play a role, right? So I mean, if you're somebody with ALS and you really don't want to have ALS, right? Like, you should have the ability to say, I want to edit my genome basically to remove this disease from me because I don't want to experience life as somebody with ALS. So I think like there's probably categories, taxonomies, I guess, of things where, you know, we decide are absolutely not allowed. Like, you can't change somebody's eye color or their skin color or whatever. And then taxonomies of things that are allowed, like, and this is where I think like genetic diseases will fall into that. So like, you know, ALS, maybe sickle cell anemia falls into it, you know, MLS, those types of things. Yeah,
well, and that's kind of the interesting thing, because I know, in that Explained documentary, and they talk about designer babies and stuff too, and they were interviewing a dwarf woman, and she was saying, it's like, well, is dwarfism, some people consider it a disease? So it's like, do I all of a sudden not have worth?
Right.
And it's like, well, but the thing is, wouldn't be born like that necessarily then either. Like you would still exist. You would just be an average height human instead, maybe. But the thing is though too, it's like I'm a tall person, so I don't know if there's a huge benefit for there to be dwarves or, and you know, and it's just, and again, it's my ignorance is part of it, but it's just like, well, yeah, if we can get rid of a lot of these things that are really crippling people and families a lot of the time, not just emotionally, but financially and physically and all that kind of stuff too. So it's like, how much pain can we prevent? But it's like, well, what's the law of unintended consequences that we're also getting into? Because that's a guarantee. Every time we evolve or advance on something, it's just like, okay, we fucked something up that we didn't even think about or couldn't perceive even.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I mean, and that's where I say like the guardrails will kind of have to be established, and there's going to be gray areas and nuances to all of that, right? So I mean, how that gets decided, I guess, will be kind of left up to the courts. But I think you can still do it without, you know, losing the entire benefit of the technology to benefit, you know, a vast number of people, right? And I think people kind of get, especially nowadays, they get really fixated on the outliers as being kind of a reason to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I guess is kind of a colloquialism, but you know, I think you need to weigh the pros and cons and see that, like, if it, you know, people are benefiting, you know, en masse by introducing this technology, then we should definitely look at, you know, how we can structure society to be able to adopt it through regulation. So I think that's kind of what needs to be looked at more than just, you know, the kind of the unique outlier use cases, I guess, is what I would say. Yeah,
and actually have real open, honest conversation about it. I think would be the other thing too, because there'll be some people that have really, they'll be passionate about their concerns, and they should be listened to. And it's like, if we can, all of us together, basically, like, hash out what possibly can go wrong, and like you say, try to do as much as we can to prevent a lot of stuff. I mean, like anything, we're going to have some fall downs, but I mean, is that ever going to stop technology? It shouldn't.
No, well, once the genie is out of the bottle, it's out, right? So these things are going to get developed one way or the other. It's just how legal they are, I guess, you know. And there's always going to be people who abuse it, but, you know, is the risk of abuse worth the benefit? I think in a lot of cases it probably is worth the benefit. But
well, and there's always the people that are willing to do whatever it takes, and it's like, well, like the space shuttle Discovery, like 7 people died on that.
Right.
We didn't stop going to space.
Yeah.
Right, and it's, I mean, they say it's like a huge disaster. It's like, it's because they lost like $10 billion. That's, it's not pretending it was the 7 people that died was the big problem, which, don't get me wrong, it fucking sucks watching a spaceship blow up because you know there's people in there.
Yeah.
But with that said, I mean, I guarantee there was 100 more people. It's like, when are they building the next ship? I'll go on that one. I don't give a shit. The last one blew up.
Yeah.
Because there's not, well, even when they talked about going to Mars, I think in 2010 they were taking a survey of how many people would live in a Mars colony. Tens of thousands of people signed up for it. And it's like, okay, we can do this then.
Yeah, right? I mean, I think that's right. I mean, those things we should allow people to explore. That's where I think personal choice needs to come into it, you know, like these days, especially like pandemic, everything else, you know, like it kind of gets scrubbed that we have to do things because we're being safe, and, you know, it's, we're sort of adopting like a lot of government overreach, but I think really, like, you know, people's ability to take risks is something that, you know, defines us as human beings. So, you know, being able to take a chance on going to Mars, even though it might not be that safe, you know, I think is absolutely something that, you know, we should do as, like, human race if we want to progress, you know. But it seems, you know, particularly, again, just with the current climate, politics, everything else, people have this fixation with just maintaining everything status quo, right? So, like, we have this real sense of conservatorship where, you know, we can maintain the climate, the environment, you know, our level of safety, all of these things forever. But I think at a certain point, like, you know, we're going to have to get outside of that if we want to progress, right? And I think that's kind of what we're losing sight of a little bit these days.
Well, and I think there's a lot of people that have that adventurous spirit where there's nothing to explore, really. on the planet anymore. I mean, we've got the oceans, but well, it's easier to go to space than it is to go to the bottom of the ocean.
Right.
And there's so much more up there than there is down. So I think that it's a huge thing that people want that sense of adventure, to explore, to be the first one to build a house on a different planet or whatever. And even if it's machinery that builds it for us first, and then we go out there to actually live in it once it's there. Well, what's wrong with that? I mean, I think there's enough people on the planet that we can do a handful of things. You know, some people can stay here and look after the trees and the water and stuff like that, and other people can go out. And maybe because we're going out, it's like, okay, well, can we do better things now to our home? Because we understand how other planets have been destroyed or whatever. And I understand, like, terraforming a planet is, just on the energy requirements alone, is unfathomably huge. Right? And it's not a short-term thing, but I think that's where societies like China, because they're already so ancient, and they still make plans for minimum 50 years, if not centuries in the future. It's like, well, why don't we start on terraforming Venus even? You know, like, why can't we go to a near warmer planet where there's a ton of energy that can be utilized? And thinking, it's like, okay, well, this is our 1,000-year plan. And as technology changes and progresses, it's going to change how we do things or how efficient we can do things. But maybe by the end of it, it only took us 500 years to terraform it instead of 1,000.
Yeah.
So
yeah. No, I see where you're going with that. I think what it is just, you know, like, because people are so caught up in the day-to-day stuff nowadays.
Yeah.
You know, and part of that is because of, you know, the divisive use of technology, which you talked about earlier. Where we're looking at these problems as, you know, being every day, it seems like some new huge problem is coming up, which really, like, in the grand scheme of things, probably isn't that big. But because, you know, we as people are always so caught up in the weeds, the day to day, we can never really plan for or execute on these, like, longer term visions. But that's where I think, like, you know, things like artificial intelligence will probably play a major role in that, like, all of a sudden, you know, your job isn't to sift through all this information and try to make the best decision for that day. You know, maybe those decisions just get made for you, and then you're really only ever thinking at a very high level, like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years out. And that's kind of the human in the loop aspect of it. Everything else just gets managed. So I think that's where, you know, things are going. So eventually we will be able to do that. But we still have to get through this, like, you know, I guess, infancy of, you know, trying to figure out just how to get ourselves out of, you know, worrying about things that are happening every day. And in some ways we're inventing problems too. Like, you know, we don't have, like, the world, like the hunger, at least in the first world, that, you know, 100 years ago we would have to have worried about, you know, like, someone does something to your crop and all of a sudden your family starves in the winter. I mean, those are major, you know, incidental chain problems.
Well, and actually, to a degree, I mean, I kind of grew up with survival was kind of a big part of what we did every day.
Yeah, you just survive,
Like, and that's what it is growing up on a farm a lot of the time, is that sometimes you have to grow a field of your own potatoes because you can't afford to buy their shit.
Yeah.
You know, and it's where, well, actually, Neil deGrasse Tyson makes a good point of that sort of thing too, where we have such privilege that we can stand and look at the night sky.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there's so many people in the world that their day-to-day is just survival.
Yeah.
But it's like, all of that is taken care of. We don't worry about food, water, shelter at all, really.
Yeah.
It's like we kind of worry about it, but it's like, to say that it's actually a fear?
Right.
Not for us.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's more and more evidence that, like, the rest of the world is actually joining us in that. So I'm quite confident that, you know, that's where we're headed, is people are just abstracted away again from, you know, worrying about the day-to-day issues of just surviving, and, you know, start applying our minds towards, you know, things that matter longer term and make things better longer term. So I think all that's coming. I don't know if it's going to happen in our lifetime, hopefully. You know, through the use of technology, we can eventually get there, but we've got some hurdles to get across before we can really do it.
Yeah, because I know the idea too of life extension was a big thing in two camps. It's like, well, should we think about extending lives, or should we think about improving quality of the existing lifespans that we have? And they're kind of one and the same to a degree. And well, somebody like Dr. David Sinclair, his one book is Lifespan, and it's amazing because they talk about how there's 4 or 5 different factors of what actually creates aging, and dying of old age isn't actually a thing necessarily. It's a very noticeable, quantifiable degradation of cells or growth of cancer, or because cancer more often than not are your senescent cells that just don't go anywhere. They're supposed to commit suicide and die off and be sloughed out of your body. Not all of them do that though, and you have basically a large group of these zombie type cells almost. And that's actually what makes us look like we're aging, or what gives us gray hair, or wrinkles in our skin and stuff like that. And then that's also what creates cancer a lot of the time, or almost every time. So it's like, well, if we can clean some of these things out, are we going to do better? And when in his book they talk about how they've added 35% life and vitality to certain mice and stuff like that when they give them these certain injections to help flush out their senescent cells better. And then their telomeres, because every time your cells copy, your genes copy, telomeres get shorter and shorter. But it's like, can we do something that keeps that protein there so they can divide indefinitely, sort of thing? So it's like maybe quality and quantity of life will actually come together. And I think that itself too, in my opinion at least anyways, it'll actually be another good stepping stone for our consciousness to start to grow up, is the other thing. Because if our average lifespan goes from 80 years to 160, he even actually says that it's entirely possible that the first person to live to 150 has already been born. So right. It's like, well, yeah, that person may not have a great life, but to live a century and a half, that'd be something else. And that becomes more and more common, and that people get healthier and healthier into their hundreds. And it's like, oh, okay, well now it means something different to be 90 years old then all of a sudden. Which, creates its own, well, are we going to have to work longer? Do pensions not start till you're 80 now, or whatever? That's its own sort of thing too. But
it's going to work out. I think the resources problem is going to be solved. it's already being solved. We see it now. There's more ways to make money than ever before, and that's going to continue into the future for sure. So
but I also think because there's going to be more and more people, it's like, well, these people need to continue working or continue to contribute, because that's going to be another part of it too, is that we have the ability to work longer, and there are people that have been. Cole and I were talking about the other day when we were working at an old folks home, and this guy at the time had been retired for 2 years less than I was alive.
Oh wow.
And it's like you try to wrap your mind around that. It's like,
my whole
holy
life
shit.
Retired, dude. That's a long time.
But it's not like he was decrepit or anything. Like, he was up walking around and cracking jokes and stuff with people, and it's just like, oh wow, okay, well this is totally possible, that I can see a lot of this stuff happening, and I think too, like as we age and stuff like that, you start to see the world for more of what it is, and I think that's, part of the reason why older people don't argue with people very often, is just like, all right, you see it your way, but it's not how things are. But you'll see it when you get to be my age. Mm-hmm. And somebody that's 17 years old compared to 70 years old, those are, even if it's the same person's lifespan, by the time they get to 70, that's a very different person.
Yeah, true.
Right? So, and how much of their life is run completely by emotion at that point? Mm-hmm. Well, when you're 17, that's all you are is emotions.
Right.
You don't even really have a lot of cognitive thought. Your brain's still fucking developing.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting. Like, you're cognitively viably functioning till you're 100 or so, mm-hmm. and then you start to degrade. It's like, well, we're all going to start seeing the world a different way then. So how does that change? And that's arguably a good thing. Mm-hmm. It's going to be its own pitfalls in there, sure, but if we're able to be more functional for longer, and then we can continue our work and our consciousness, and our lives are actually built around having a longer lifespan. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, well then how does that work then? Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of thing that I think that's like, okay, well maybe then something like Neuralink will actually be a help on that sort of thing too, that if you do start to get dementia or something like that, it's like, well, can we actually mechanically also help your synapses run the way they're supposed to and have your brain kind of mapped out so it continues to work in a certain way? And then biomechanically, all of us can live to 150, you know, and be strong, functional people. And then with a degree of functional eugenics, I mean, on the, what is it, germline eugenics, so if you get changes, it stays with you, it doesn't go into your, is it germline?
That's correct, I'm not sure.
Yeah, but it's the one that only affects you, it doesn't affect your offspring if you have children in that time. But I think that'd be another way of looking at it, what's going on sort of thing too, that if you can enhance yourself and make yourself healthier and you can do more for longer, but it also then, with that said, we don't have to have kids when we're 20. If we're healthy and functional at 40 and 50, we're grown, developed people. We start having kids at that point. Oh, okay, now we can actually still play with them until we're 70, until they grow up and actually are more functionally evolved and understanding, and again, not just run by fully emotions and then have kids and then have dump their emotional problems onto them sort of thing.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
So it might actually help all of mankind, humankind, whatever, evolve that much faster. That's me looking at the good side. Though too, right? So
yeah. Yeah, I mean, like your point, I guess the downside is just a requirement for more resources to get people living longer, but in theory they're contributing more too, right? So, you know, I think would probably balance it out. How like the mind reacts to being alive for, 160 years, I don't know. You know, that's the question, like, do you, like, like, does your mental acuity just go down over time? It doesn't really have anything to do with, genetics or the physical functioning of your brain, but just more like a natural process to wind down. I'm not sure, but yeah, it'd be interesting to see how it turns out. I think you're right, like, it does look like, all the signs are that that's going to be how things are, right? Like, we're not just anti-aging, but prosthetics and advancements and, mechanical engineering, those things are all going to contribute to people living longer, so.
Yeah, and well, I mean, that's kind of the whole idea of where a utopian future, which I think I agree with Mantis to say that utopia isn't what we should even really want necessarily. Well, and we talked about that even just earlier, is that you kind of need some level of struggle. Like, you need to have a reason to push to want to do things, because if your life becomes too easy, then you don't want to do anything, or you don't need to really do anything.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's always going to be a certain segment of people that just fall into that category, right? Like, they're just not motivated by anything other than, the immediate needs of the here and now. But I think, like, you'll find that people that don't have any issues, or things that they're worried about in terms of, like, their survival, will still continue to, achieve more, just because, as a function of just who they are, I guess, like their personality. So I think those people will always end up being the leaders. Yeah, there's always going to be people that don't want to do anything, like in the Idiocracy movie.
Yeah.
Just sit in
Go
there.
away, Eaton.
Walmart, I love you. Costco, I love you. Yeah, there's always going to be people, I think, that like do that. But I think, the vast majority of people will, like, once they're not worried about, their day-to-day needs being met over time, are probably going to want to better themselves in some way. So it's kind of like the Star Trek Next Generation view of society. I think, like, they kind of like glazed over like that segment, I guess. Like, everybody was just sort of on board with that vision. But I think that is probably, more likely where we're going to be going is, you're not worried about making money. You don't need physical wealth, because it doesn't really do anything for you anymore.
Yeah, well, and having a technology-based society would be great, because, I mean, there would be a lot of, well, shit-shoveling kind of jobs that we wouldn't have to do anymore. We can build machinery to do all that sort of stuff.
That's right.
And actually, Mike and I were talking about this last night, is that there's going to be probably upwards of 30% of the population that's going to be useless no matter what. Like you just said too, sort of thing, that there's there's always going to be pitfalls for certain people, or some people, yeah, will always take the easy way out no matter what. So they never really would have contributed anyway.
Yeah.
So no big deal there. But Frank, how's it going, buddy?
How's the problems?
Yeah, it's
Let's get out.
Yeah.
I guess we can take it. Do you want to take a short break?
Yeah, we can take a break now.
Yeah, I'm just thinking to grab pizza's outside.
Oh shit.
I'm assuming you do some like post editing after.
Oh yeah, that's no problem.
And you can edit out all my dumb comments.
I mean, I do some editing, but usually I kind of just let it flow as much as I can.
Wow.
So it's kind of nice though too, because I mean, just for me to get that fucking speech from life extension.
Yeah.
Jesus, that's a long walk.
Takes you a while to pack it all, right?
You guys paused?
Yeah.
Got some pizza.
You're a pain.
Is that tortilla?
Chicken pot pie. I haven't got meat lovers pizzas. I actually don't like meat lovers, so chicken pot pie does.
Ashley loves the meat. Don't kid you, anybody. Come on. Bastards.
She likes the meat.
Giggity.
How's Frank doing upstairs?
Oh, he was doing okay, and then he's doing his, I really have to pee, let me stand on you.
They came down here, rang the bell a few times, kind of just looked at him. Like, yeah.
Just bored.
Yeah, he does
Wants
that.
to be included.
You're high maintenance, dog.
You gotta use your words like a big boy.
You're high maintenance. Here, migrate up, and then you can stand the cat here. Donk. Yeah, that's right, trapped.
Oh yeah.
You guys
So
all
this
done?
is more or less the type of interview you're looking to do.
Yeah, this is pretty normal. She goes on and on. I mean, it always kind of gets off, because I mean, I don't know enough about AI to have like a 2-hour conversation about it anyway. But I mean, like anything, it's not it wouldn't be a singular topic regardless. It's always going to be, well, what does it entail? How's this going to benefit humanity? What's the bad side of what it's going to do? What's it going to be for the planet or agriculture? I mean, our AI alone is going to have a lot of integral parts of everything that it can touch. And I think that's kind of well, I mean, the older I got, I think that was my big awakening to understand that there's so much going on in the world. And so much that of it's interconnected. It's like, well, how does anybody know anything even? Like they're like, well, just take what you can and the rest of it's kind of whatever. Because there's just too much in the world to know. Like no one person can know it all.
Yeah, and that's the point. So, you kind of think of robots as just like, I guess maybe you should wait till the interview to talk about it. Like robots doing the like kind of the physical stuff, and people don't have to work on it. It's actually the cognitive pieces too.
Yeah.
Right? Like if I don't have to pour through the same like Excel spreadsheet for the millionth time, because it's my job to know some nuance in finance. Like machine learning will do that for you. So it just tells you the answer, right? So it's stuff like that, right? I mean, and there's some things that like it won't be able to tell you, and that's where human judgment will have to play a role.
Yeah.
It's really more like judgment, I think, would be kind of the value in the future, not, just the specific doings of tasks, right?
I'm still waiting till we go full RoboCop and become cyborgs.
We were talking about that actually, the whole Neuralink, and it's like, well, between Neuralink and life extension procedures and stuff, it's like, is this actually what's going to make us evolve?
Is Neuralink like uploading your mind? No? What is it?
Well, it's basically Elon Musk's idea to chip your brain basically. So.
Nothing evil could be possibly done with that.
Yeah, Johnny Mnemonic had a happy ending. So.
That's what we were talking about, like, where's the line between, benefit and potentially something bad?
Yeah, or that older anime, Ghost in the Shell, where it's like everybody's integrated to a degree, and it's just like, well, I need somebody to break into something for me, but I'm not going to do it myself, so I'll just put a program or algorithm into somebody's head. They'll do stuff, they'll bring it to where I need it to, and then they'll fuck off and then forget everything. It's like, well, that turns into a real fucking problem real quick then too, because cybercrime takes a whole new step into real dangerous territory. I think it's bad enough as it is, because cybercrime can really fuck people's lives. But it's like you can fuck your mind now too.
Yeah.
You think identity theft is bad now? Just wait.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's just it. Like, could it get to the point where you look into the mirror and you don't even know what you're seeing?
I mean, it may just turn out to be like how they deal
Didn't
with
they
security.
touch on that in, what was that new Netflix show, with the guy, and you can port into other people's bodies or something, with uploading, can't remember the name.
Was it Upload? That's on Amazon.
No, it wasn't that one. It wasn't that one. It was on Netflix. It had 2 seasons, and then I think they canceled it.
Well, sounds interesting.
Can't remember the name. Well, do you remember what that show's name was?
Oh. Altered Carbon.
Yes, that one.
That's a...
Upload your mind into somebody else's body. Pretty sure it's impossible.
Well, then you can just... Your entire existence is basically on a hard drive. An interchangeable hard drive. And, well, like, I think probably one of the worst examples of what had happened, there was an accident or something like that. And their, 10-year-old daughter gets put into the body of like a 6-year-old woman. It's like, she's 10.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's what your insurance covered.
Yeah.
What?
This is what you get.
Yeah, it's like, holy fuck.
Which doesn't make sense to me at all, because your personality is shaped by more than just your thought patterns.
Yeah,
it's also by your hormones and...
That's why it doesn't work. It's the physical structure of your brain.
So even if you were to sort of port yourself into the computer or whatever, the question becomes, would you still even be yourself without all of those factors influencing you how you think and act?
I think as long as you lived in a human body, it would be okay. But I think that's the other part of it too, is that it's machine learning is the other thing. So it's, well, I think the idea of like taking a brain scan or basically taking like a photograph of somebody's brain like they do in a lot of sci-fi shows, I don't think that's how it would work. I think you would actually have to have something like one of those stacks that has all of your existences top to bottom and plays like an entire non-stop video. Then it can actually compile like who and what you actually are. And then when it's put back into a human body, where it needs to actually have those chemical responses and stuff like that, that has happened. Well, actually, they talk about that in Replicas. That's a Keanu Reeves movie. And they try to put these, dead soldiers' minds into machines.
Oh, yeah, I watched that.
And it's just like, it's rejecting you because it's like, it's not a human body. It doesn't realize that it's in a machine. It doesn't have the senses that you're used to. And they even actually touch on that on We Are Legion, We Are Bob.
Right.
And it's a
yeah.
audiobook that series that I listened to, and the guy was a bit of a loner and stuff like that too, but it kind of got to that point as well, that once he was basically uploaded into a machine, is that he was getting frustrated about something and he had like a deep exhale. But there's nothing to exhale, and even the sound sounded weird, and there's no exhaustion of like getting that breath out, and he didn't relax because of it, and then he started kind of panicking about it. So he finally just created himself a VR program where he could go in there, and it made it physical, and the more he added to it, the more he thought about what reality was like. He actually got the VR so good that it's like, okay, I need a hot cup of coffee, boom, there it is. Cat jumps up on his leg, starts petting his cat and stuff like that. It's just like, oh, yeah, this feels right now. But it's like, yeah, that human existence, I think I agree with you fully, actually, that the human element, I think, is something that can't be taken from us yet. Or I think that would always be the problem with AI, is that no matter how good it gets or how close it can replicate our type of thought, unless it actually has a physical corporeal body, it's not going to be like us.
Yeah.
It can't be.
Well, then you have the question of sort of robots and how do you program empathy? When a robot maybe won't have emotions per se, they won't have, you have empathy for someone else because you can imagine it happening to you, but if you don't have a physical body that feels pain or any sort of other like tactile or emotional response, how do you expect a robot to react to, say, like an animal in distress or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Well, that could be learned, I think.
Well, it's tough to say though too, because emotions and logic are not really reconcilable either.
No, not at all.
And we struggle with it constantly, so how do you program a machine to deal with that?
Like emotionally, compassion is like you feel compassion for something and you try to save it, say, but logically, would you waste resources on something like that?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's...
What is life?
I mean, that's something they do every day. Like, you have a kid come into the ER, their prognosis doesn't look good. Does it make sense to spend the time to try and save them and waste all those resources on someone who may not survive? But emotionally, we say, yes, it is.
Yeah, every time, yeah.
And that's what makes us human.
Yeah. But that's it. The other side of that sort of thing too is like on Final Space, and the program or the AI that's running the ship goes, I knew it was wrong, but I did it anyway. Is that what it's like to be human, Gary? Gary's just like, oh. But it is. That's exactly what it's like to be human.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying, like, maybe people are too caught up. These things are gonna like replace people. That's not the point. People are always gonna have a role. It's just you're not doing the repetitive crap anymore. That's the thing to focus on, like cognitively and physically, right?
Yeah, I think that idea of utopia is a fever dream anyway. I mean, yeah, like, you need to have a system that's running so well that everybody's happy. Fuck, you'd have to have a lot of moving parts. And we're doing pretty good now, and I think if you could take somebody even from 100 years ago and transport them to today, they would think this is utopia.
Well, yeah, that's right.
So
I think it's what I guess Mike was talking about. That people also thrive on the conflict, right?
yeah,
That's why it always blows my mind when people are like, oh, I wish I was born in the 50s. I wish I was born in the 70s. I'm just like, this is the best time to be alive.
yeah. Talk to Steven Pinker; he'll tell you all about it. He makes a lot of really well thought out, compelling arguments backed by fact. There's less war. There's less health issues. There's people living longer. There's more access to food. There's less infant mortality rates. Like everything is
You
measurably
don't die
better.
because you got caught on a nail or...
Yeah,
Well, it's because people like view the past through,
rose-colored lenses.
rose-colored lenses because they
Yeah.
forget about all the bad stuff, right? But
Yeah,
for sure, it's probably the best time to be alive is right now by a long shot.
yeah, exactly. Because there's so much going on with the world, and the whole idea of us making better machinery, better technology, better computers. Like, I don't think we should all have to, slave away, busting our backs, getting wheat taken down by hand. If you still want to do that, go right ahead, I guess, but you're doing it for yourself. You're not doing it for the benefit of really anybody else, because you can't do it fast enough to benefit anybody else.
That's right. That's the problem. So like,
Yeah.
there's a percentage of your time that's dedicated to thinking about important stuff, right? Like we call it like value, like more higher value add activities. So like, thinking about your life like 10 years from now, 20 years from now, how can you structure things, to make it a maximum benefit for you, not just you, but everybody else. Well, if you're stuck in, this 90% day-to-day, just repetitive doings, you don't really have the time to commit to, the really big value, which is, just structuring things so that everybody receives some benefit. So I think that's where AI, machine learning, all this, new technologies is going. And we're seeing it now already, like I was saying earlier, compared to 100 years ago, I mean, we live in like a utopia, right?
Yeah.
So I think we just keep focusing on, enabling technologies that abstract us away from, the boring day to day will eventually, become even better. So I think the term is for it's a compounding thing, I think.
Yeah, that's actually a great way to look at it. Well, and I think about that too with all the things that we do have. I mean, the fact that we measure things a certain way, like a calendar, like the way we measure our time throughout the year. That took centuries and centuries of people looking into the sky and looking at the seasons change and stuff, and it's like, no, we don't quite have it yet.
Yeah.
And if we didn't start thinking about that thousands of years ago, we wouldn't have the grasp of time that we have.
Yeah.
Our trains would still be crashing into each other.
Right. Yeah,
stuff,
that's right.
So, yeah, our satellites wouldn't work because, our understanding of time has gotten so good that we understand it dilates if you're traveling faster or if you're away from a gravitational point.
Right, that's right.
And it's like, holy fuck, okay. Now this is getting into the things that it's like, we really need to know what the fuck is going on. To the level of precision where, like the clocks that are working on GPS actually have to run, is it faster, faster than they do on Earth, just so they can actually map out things properly because they're experiencing gravity differently. Not by a lot, but enough to fuck up actually where you're going. And it's like I tried to wrap my mind around that, and it's like, oh yeah, space-time, because they work together anyways. And if that thing is moving, because it's orbiting, even if it's geosynchronous, it's still moving in its own space around the planet. I mean, it's staying stationary relative to the planet, but it's still traveling at whatever, at least 17,000 miles an hour just to stay in orbit, even if it is 5,000 miles from the surface, because it eventually will be pulled back in. So its own speed is one thing, plus the lack of gravity that it's experiencing and all these other things. And it's like, how many people did it take to figure that shit out? The fact that I know about it, I find impressive because I don't really know shit.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, and well, even the things that I do, like the reason why we measure things the way we do, it's like, well, that's interesting, but where did those standards of measurement come from even? Right? Like, and then
somebody had to take the time to think, to imagine it or come up with it, right?
Yeah, and that's, and I think it was Eric Weinstein that had made that point sort of thing too. It's like, well, how high is Everest? And it's like, well, it's whatever, 5.5 miles from sea level. How do we know that though? Because it's in the middle of a mountain range. How did we compare it? Like, how did we make the measurement to make the measurement? Right? Yeah, and it's like, oh, yeah, where did that shit start from?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, somebody had to take the time to imagine it, basically. But yeah, I mean, I think that's like what I was saying. Like the enabling part of all of this stuff is that we get away from worrying about this stuff that really has no well, I mean, to us it has like immediate survival benefit, but really in the long term doesn't really give your life a lot of value. And I think that's like if you look at kind of the ancient Rome period where they all of a sudden they were coming up with all of these new ideas and like a lot of the stuff that we also had these huge thought leaders like the Socrates and the Aristotles of the world. Well, like why was that, right? And you look back on it, and the reason is actually very negative. It's because they had slaves basically that abstracted them away from worrying about their survival, and they could spend all of their time just thinking about like the universe, for example. So in a similar sense, like I think machines will give us that ability or capability, just maybe a step beyond where we actually gain the benefit of fast computing and machines at scale to do these things much faster than you could ever imagine before. So I think that's like I think we're headed in that direction. I think we're seeing the benefits already. It's just how much time can we spend today thinking about new systems, new ways of structuring things to reap that benefit versus what we're spending time doing, just surviving, right? So I think that's kind of the upside or the future I see, I guess, of humanity anyway.
Yeah, yeah, and that's, I think where where we're going is good. And that whole, well, that analogy of, don't throw the baby out with bathwater sort of thing. That's such a good one, because it's like, why would we tear down this structure that's doing so well for just about everybody?
Mm-hmm.
And even the handful of people that are having certain issues and stuff like that, they're real issues,
Yeah.
but they're not as bad as certain life-changing issues that we had to deal with, or people are still currently dealing with in other parts of the world. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I mean, I understand black people are disproportionately fucked because they were born with a certain color of skin.
Mm-hmm.
It sucks and it's stupid. But not everybody sees people being equal, and that's shitty. But at the same time, like, whenever I say that sort of thing, it's like, well, people aren't equal in a lot of senses, and it's not because of color of skin or size or gender or whatever sort of thing like that. But I mean, I'm going to be better at doing construction than somebody that's 5 feet tall and 90 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of things I'm probably going to be able to do better than they are.
Right.
Doesn't mean I'm a better person, it's just I'm better suited for that one particular task.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the other part where a lot of people point the finger and bitch about things that's what's wrong or what they're not getting a fair shake of. Say, okay, but what can you do? What are you good at?
That's right.
Do that instead. Focus on your energy on that.
Mm-hmm.
If you take half the energy that that you're using to get mad with and use it in something functional instead,
Yeah.
you're probably going to do pretty well.
Yeah. And I think that's the danger of like people expecting equality of outcome, right? So like, we're all born with different skills and abilities, and somehow we're all going to have like the same level or lifestyle, same access to things, which I think is completely. It's the problem with it is that like humans just value certain things over others, right? Like you're never going to get rid of that, I think, to some extent. So it's supply and demand, I guess, at its core. Like if there's less people with particular abilities or talents, and there's a larger demand, people are going to be willing to trade more, give more in order to receive those. So, yeah, I think you're never going to get rid of, some people that are resentful, I guess, or like want what other people have to some degree. But you get, at the same time, you can still raise the standards, I think, for everybody. So there's always that baseline, like your life should never be worse than this, right?
Yeah.
Based on what you contribute to society.
Yeah. Well, and like, you can actually argue yourself on that one, because it's like, yes, but that baseline is an arbitrary thing, because it needs to be low enough that it forces people to do things.
Mm-hmm.
But it can't be high enough where, we become lazy and complacent.
That's right.
Too, and it's the thing too, like, as much as I point the finger and piss and moan about, fucking lockdowns and this, that, and the other thing, it's like, well, no, what are the benefits that are coming out of this? Because there's a lot of good things that are coming out of it too. Mm-hmm. And it's like we're starting to understand what's actually important in the world, and I was happy as hell that my ability to get food in the last 2 years hasn't really changed. Mm-hmm. I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge feather in the cap of humankind, to say that we can still feed ourselves even though the world is shutting down.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's a pretty awesome thing, and I think a lot of people are overlooking that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
The fact that we can turn on a tap and it's almost infinite clean water.
Yeah.
It's not, obviously, but for what a person can use in a lifetime even, it pretty much is infinite.
Yeah, it's interesting, like, as things become easier, we just seem to fixate on smaller and smaller issues as being bigger and bigger problems, right? When you drill into it, some of them are problems, but are they really, the foundational monumental problems that we had in the past? Well, not really, right? Like, you're not worried about somebody, like a group of people at the gates, coming into your house and killing you and stealing all your stuff. We don't have those problems anymore. So these are kind of the new problems. How that shakes out, we talked about that, the problems with, sort of technology creating these divisive algorithms, but also, what we talked about was, I guess, the media side of it, which is, you know, them leveraging these platforms to create divisiveness because that sells papers, right?
Yeah.
There's a whole problem nowadays, I think, with that, where like media has decided to not necessarily stick to journalistic standards and just provide information as it is. Now they're feeling a lot of pressure because people get all their information from many different sources that aren't necessarily mainstream news to compete with those channels now. So they're incentivized to create divisiveness so that, you know, we consume information from them as our primary news source. So, you know, all of this stuff I think kind of interweaves. It's kind of interesting that we're talking about it, but you know, just fixating on small issues, I think, seems to be the bane of our current society.
Yeah.
Mostly just because things are so comfortable, right?
Yeah. Well, it's actually a good measure of our progress is that we don't worry about food, water, shelter.
Yeah.
Like those primary things are taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
So we can start working on some of the smaller issues, but and that in itself though too, it's like, well, again, if we make life too easy for too long, people get weak.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's what that whole cycle. It's like hard times make strong people make good times make weak people make bad times.
Yeah, that's
and we kind of go in that cycle.
Yeah.
You know, and it's weird, but it's like at the same time, every time we have a bad cycle, it forces invention and innovation and the strength of humankind that we forgot about sometimes because we got soft.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's like, where's our perseverance? And I think, I always think it's funny too, because like whenever we watch a lot of these stories, whether it's, you know, these people that are the small group of rebels or whatever, like you want to look at Star Wars or Maze Runner or Hunger Games or whatever sort of thing like that. Like there's tons of these very similar stories where it's like, well, we're fighting against the system and we're going to tear it down, but it's like, but this small group of people wants to fuck it up for like 90% of the population now though.
Yeah.
So, but it's like, but they're still human, so they are right to a degree, like they should be treated better.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, well, what the fuck now? I mean, maybe not Hunger Games, because that's definitely like 9% of the population fucked in that one. But I mean, that's just it. I mean, well, something like Star Wars, like there's how many systems that are working. I mean, you don't actually ever hear really about how well the Empire is actually doing in the galaxy or the good things they're doing, right? It's just like, oh, the evil Empire, oh, they're so bad. Like,
Yeah,
well,
it's one-dimensional in that sense.
did we actually look into that?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, like how much stability, you know, benefited the stability, I guess, of their reign, I guess, you know,
Yeah.
Emperor, which is.
Yeah, which I mean, and I get when they say it's like, well, no, I mean, it's some jackboot thugs telling you this is how you're gonna live your life, sort of thing like that. It's like, yeah, but in a galaxy, would that be the only way to make it work is to subjugate every single last living soul?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so. And especially when you need things from people, you can't make everybody your slave. It's not gonna work.
That's right. Yeah.
So, I mean, part of the reason why there's a rebellion and stuff too, but I mean, at the same time, I mean, to real world things, I mean, that's a thing that we see over and over again where we see subjugated peoples and we want something like the states to be the big brother to walk in and say, no, you guys are fucking up, quit fucking with these people, they didn't do anything wrong and you're being bullies. Mm-hmm. Right? But at their token sort of thing too, it's just like, America's really quick to point the finger and call these people terrorists and stuff too. Well, what makes America's cause more altruistic or more genuine or more wholesome than the people that they're calling terrorists?
Yeah.
Those terrorists want to live their lives. They think what they're doing is right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and I think, I mean, that is, again,
judge, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, and that's, I think, a great thing about, again, with the advent of technology, is that you'll hear something, you'll see something that gets really fucking bad, and everybody has an opinion and jumps on a bunch of bandwagons. And then a week later, all the rest of the information comes out, and it's like, oh, we all did it again, didn't we? We all fucking presumed we knew exactly what was going on without any real detail.
Yeah. So
it's like, okay, maybe we should all just step back, maybe not have an emotional reaction about shit every time.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's the thing, though, too, is that some of those things are pretty deep wounds for some of it. I mean, like the whole Black Lives Matter sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, all lives matter. But yes, but until black lives actually seem to equal all the other lives, they don't all matter.
Mm-hmm.
Because some people are saying that they're not.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, yeah, but the black and white racism is probably the worst in the States as it compared to anywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know that for a fact, but that's what it seems like, and partly because I'm right here looking at it a lot of the time. But, I mean, people go to China and you're Chinese. If they want to live there, you're going to be Chinese.
Yeah.
That's all there is to it. You can be a white person still, obviously, because you got the complexion for it, but you're going to live their lifestyle.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I have opinions on all that, but I feel like they're kind of missing the point with a lot of the Black Lives Matter. I think it's a good movement in the sense that it brings problems to the forefront. But I think the kind of the overarching problem is more like an inequality issue, right? So like, why is there so much inequality? And when you look at it, it's down to like who's getting the resources, right? And so why are there so few resources amongst all of these groups to go around? And they think it's turned into this like the white people versus the black people, but it's not. It's these the super rich basically versus everybody else, right?
Yeah.
That's the part that they're missing.
yeah, and that's always the thing that they use those divisive things to keep us pitted against each other,
yeah.
because if we're fighting each other, we're not looking at them.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So it's helpful, I think, for them in that sense that they're able to kind of get us to be divisive and point fingers at each other, because then kind of sort of glosses over this issue of the massive wealth gap, right, that exists, especially in the U.S.
Yeah.
So I think until that gets solved, really, I mean, those problems will still come up until people really kind of start to realize or wake up to the fact that that's going on, or that narrative is out there. And like, I think people point to it, but it's in the here and now when you see like your neighbor getting all this stuff, and he's white, let's say, and you're not. It's much easier to just kind of point the finger at him and be like, well, it's because of benefits that he's got that I haven't gotten. And it might be true to some degree, but really it's more, I think it's more centered on, the fact that there's just not enough to go around for everybody else. And, there's a very small minority that doesn't really have anything to do with race or anything else that's getting most of the benefit of the resources. So that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, the other part, I think, too, when they freed the slaves, or in Canada, we opened up our borders basically to the reserves, and it's just like, well, you guys don't have to live there. Mm-hmm. Like, no, you put us here, we'll stay here. It's like, we're sorry. I don't know how, in what way we can say sorry or do anything ever to make up for what we did. Same as with the blacks in the States.
Right.
It's like, we all want to, I mean, for the most part, everybody just wants to be people. Mm-hmm. But it's like, yeah, but you fucked us for a long time. Yeah. And that still fucking sits there. And that's, these generational issues that are still around. And it's like, yeah, but I mean, how often or in what ways do we say sorry so it's going to be worked out? And it's like, well, when all kinds of shit happens and nobody really says or does anything about it, it's like nothing's really changed then, has it? Mm-hmm. Well, no, but it's like, but that's not all of us, but it's like, it's the bad apple that spoils the bunch.
Right.
Remember what that actually means. It only takes one thing to fuck it for everybody.
Right.
And it's like, okay, yeah, so it's like, we all need to do better. Mm-hmm. And it took me a while to get on to that understanding of what they were trying to get, and I feel like a fucking moron for taking so long, but it's like, yeah, people like us, when we see that type of thing happen, or those injustices, even if they're small ones, say, hey, what are you doing? You don't have to get in somebody's face or anything like that, but just bring awareness to the situation. Ask a question. What are you doing? Did you think that was fair? Would you have liked that happen to you?
Right.
Oh, maybe give that person a chance to think. Don't just shout at them and then it polarizes them and they double down on the way they feel, then I have to fucking go even louder. It's like, well, now I just started an argument instead of looking for a resolution. Yeah. And I think that's like, it's going to take a long time. It's still going to be a long road for all of us to get down. But again, like Steven Pinker had said, I mean, things are better than they used to be.
Yeah,
Right,
I think
so
things are improving for sure in that regard. But I mean, I don't agree with is like creating special rules, right? You know, I think that moves against quality of opportunity in a lot of ways, and I think that creates a lot of divisiveness in our society. And I understand why politicians do it. You know, it's just an easy lever for them to pull to avoid, you know, responsibility for actually taking action. I think ultimately, like, you just cause a lot more problems later on than you actually solve in the moment, because special treatment, I mean, is just going to breed, you know, envy and kind of, it's just going to cause, you know, tensions amongst the groups that are getting it and the groups that aren't. So I think it just has to be a level playing field from a rules perspective. And you focus your effort on creating the opportunities for everybody. And eventually, as long as you keep that as your core focus, I think over time, like, things will just balance out.
Yeah, and I think that part of it is just there hasn't been enough time that has passed. Is part of it, because I mean, when the example that I heard is that when the slaves were freed, within like the next year or so, it's like, oh, see, they're free and they're still, you know, they're dumb and they don't do anything and they don't want this and that. And it's like, well, give them a bit of time to get on their feet.
Right.
Like, let's not immediately say that it's like because they're black, that's why they're not like the rest of us or not as good at what we're doing. It's like you barely let them into this society. They haven't even got their footing on what it is they're doing yet.
Yeah.
And it's like 100 and some years later or whatever. It's like they still need to play catch up to a degree for some of it, because there's a lot of disenfranchised people are not able to get the education, or they draw lines in neighborhoods to make sure that only blacks can buy in certain places. And it's like, holy shit, this stuff is really old and it doesn't change, it seems like. But it's like, well, it's getting better though. Let's not focus on the negative.
Yeah, you can't argue with that. I mean, across the board.
So
it's getting better, you know, no matter which study you look at. But I think, you know, the mistake is trying to artificially inflate one group over the other.
Yeah.
I think it just, like I said earlier, I think it really just compounds the issue rather than solves it. It may solve some temporary issues for the group that's receiving the benefit.
Yeah.
But over the long term, it's a negative thing.
Maybe. I think if women want to take over, they should. You want to run shit, please do. You know, like the analogy I always like thinking about is that, and this is very traditional way of looking at relationships and stuff like that, but it's like a man will build a house, a woman will make it a home. Well, we've built a society. Let's let women make it a comfortable society now. I think that's fair. I mean, maybe it took a little longer than it should have for us to get to that point, but at the same time, please do. Please take control.
Yeah, I think what you'd find, at least in the studies I've read, is that you know, in the fairest societies that are out there, where they've tried these experiments to see, you know, either to artificially inflate, in this case we're talking about women, but a group, to go after certain fields or, you know, sort of be in certain positions of power, let's say, that typically, like, the imbalance still exists, right?
Yeah.
So whenever things like that, it kind of suggests that there's something like more beyond just, you know, sex or whatever at play that causes people to be attracted to certain roles, right? And I know it's not a popular opinion, like we kind of want to think of ourselves as being like, you know, completely equal in all ways to every race and creed, but I think the reality is, like, yeah, you know, like having that Y chromosome probably does have an impact in some sense on, you know, the type of career or the things that you pursue in your life, right? So, I mean, it's not, like I say, it's not a popular opinion, but I think when you read the studies and you look at, like, the experiments that they've tried, I'm thinking of the Scandinavian experiments where they've tried this, that, you know, generally speaking, like, they had certain groups that were more inclined to take on certain roles, regardless of how many barriers you removed in their way. So, you know, I think we're trying to, like, you know, try to say that, like, everything is a function of social constructionism. And I don't think that's true. I core, like we are kind of who we are. Like we bring natural talents to bear, and it's not to say that like you're not going to have women that want to be in positions of power like CEOs of companies. I think they should absolutely pursue that. But to say that to have an equal society, we're going to have equal representation of both men and women in CEO positions is incorrect, because I think it's just determined by the women who are interested in those roles, not by us to superimpose that.
Well, and I think the other part of it is too is that just because you have an X chromosome doesn't mean you're going to be a better leader.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right. So that was always my thing, is that if women are in power and they're in there for a long time and they change whatever rules and the institutions and the way things are done or whatever, it's like they still may realize that it's not as easy as it looks.
Right.
And it's easy to be on the outside looking in, pointing the finger saying men are doing this all wrong.
Right.
Well, then show us how it's done.
Right.
Then you get in there and then it's like, oh, well, I didn't realize it was going to be this hard. It's like, I know.
Yeah.
It's not that we were doing a shitty job. It's a hard job for anybody.
Right.
So that might be the other part of it too. And that's actually why I kind of would prefer that women would take over for a while.
Yeah.
Is that, and the worst thing that's going to happen is that they do as bad a job as men do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So like, what the fuck?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you need to do is really just, again, like not focus on, these arbitrary goals of just having perfect 50% representation. It's more about
that doesn't make sense.
It's more about, how do you remove the barriers to people in all groups to achieve those roles that they want to do or they're talented to be in, right? I mean that, they bring some talent to bear to be able to run a company better. And I don't think it really has too much to, like I say, I guess I'm kind of walking backwards on this a little bit, but I don't think it has a lot to do with like whether or not you're male or female or any other sort of attribute. But I think there are some characteristics that draw you towards specific roles, and a lot of it, as a male, is probably driven by testosterone to some degree, right? I mean, we kind of play these hormones and physicalities off as things that don't matter, but I think the reality is they do have an impact on your trajectory, right, as a person. So it's not to say that there's going to be a lot of very talented women that would end up in CEO positions, and I think we should absolutely enable them. But I don't think we should force it to say like things aren't equal unless we see equal representation across the board for those high power positions. I don't think that's correct.
No. Well, yeah, and more even deeper to that point is that the fact that women are more the nurturers than men are. Not to say, again, not to broad stroke it, sort of say that all women are better at healthcare or more empathetic than men are. Mm-hmm. That's not true either, but more often than not, or like you're saying, on average, more women will not necessarily take roles of power or control because they feel that their role is more functional, better served, more to their liking, right, with their empathy or with their beliefs lie.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And and a lot of times, with that saying, it's like, well, we're here to mend all the people that you break, because men are violent and destructive, sort of thing. It's like, yes, but we also build everything too. Mm-hmm. And again, not to broad stroke it, to say that yes, there are women that build things. Mm-hmm. But just about every building that's ever been constructed is mostly men that do that.
Right.
Because we're physically able to do the heavier work. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, and I think again, your physicality just plays a role with that, right? Like I think there's some determination about what you end up doing just based on your physical attributes. Yeah. I don't think it's something we can get around. It's just what it is.
But more so to the point I guess I'm trying to make is that some women only see men as, well, like the toxic masculinity and that aggressive and destructive sort of thing like that. But it's like, well, no, we create just like you do, just in very different ways.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Like women make all people.
Yeah.
That's a fact of the matter. Mm-hmm. And because they make all people, they're going to naturally want to take care of babies better because they make them. Mm-hmm. It's a chemical thing that actually binds a woman to their child.
Right.
And most of the time it works. Like 99% of the time it works. Sometimes, a woman has a baby and is fucking terrified and like runs out of the room.
Yeah.
Doesn't happen very often, but I've heard of it.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
for sure.
But
Yeah.
it's the thing though too is that when on the other side of it too is that it's not that women aren't destructive either, and that like the woman running out of the hospital room is not a great example, but it's like women are destructive in other ways, sort of thing too. And well, my mom made a great point of something that's definitely smaller, but it's like the idea is like 2 women can be friends, not 3 though.
Interesting.
That's like, huh, interesting. Right, and again, not to broad stroke, but it's like, yeah, like I can kind of see that actually. But it's just people want to point out stereotypes and say, well, all guys are this, or all blacks are that, or all women are this, or all Asians are that, or whatever. It's like, no, we are all way more complex than a few stereotypes or a few categories that could be filled in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, and there's nobody that you're going to 100% agree with on everything. And if there is, it's because you don't have an opinion on anything, you just want to be liked, or you just want to agree.
Yeah, that's another big problem. I think society these days is just way too much people have way too much dependency on how much strangers like them, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it tends to lend credence to like a lot of like ideologies that just people latch onto because they want to be on the right side of history rather than using, critical thinking about what's actually going on, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, like for sure, I mean, that's kind of like one issue is, it's not really popular to have those opinions nowadays. Like, Ashley and I argue about those types of things all the time. I think she kind of thinks she's on more of the social constructionist side where she thinks that it's basically the way that we act and choices that we made are all dependent on, what expectations society has put on us, and then that's why, women are more likely to take caregiver roles and, men are more likely to take construction jobs, for example. But
Yeah.
I think, I mean, like, there probably is some expectation there, but I think, like, if you're, really determined and talented in something, like, you're going to know that, and you're going to pursue it, right? So I think, we need to enable those people to get into those positions, like, regardless of whatever their sex is. But at the same time, like, you can't ignore that you shouldn't be forcing or putting pressure on women to go into STEM fields or something that they're just not interested in doing, right? Like, it's because that's not going to be good for anybody. It's not going to be good for the women that go into those fields and aren't interested in it. And they would rather be doing something else, and that's not going to be good for society because, they're going to have people in those positions that aren't interested. So you just really need to focus on, like, the equality of opportunity, I think, not outcomes.
Yeah.
Which is not a popular thing these days.
Yeah, but and that's kind of where it's an odd shake because, I mean, there is certain people that have been afforded more opportunity and stuff, but, I mean, say blacks are disproportionately, or natives are disproportionately likely to get work and stuff like that. But it's like, well, we do all know what the definitions of minority and majority are though too, right? I mean, if you have 100 people in a room, there's a pretty good chance that even in Canada, at least 60% of those people, randomly picked out of the entire country, 60% of them are probably going to be white. That's the majority. Like, sorry to say, like, there's going to be more white people in all jobs because there's more of us.
Right.
It kind of just seems like simple math, and it's, again, not saying that other people shouldn't be afforded certain opportunities, but not just because they're native, or not just because they're a female. It's like they still have to be able to do the job.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. So it should be more, like, the focus should be more on, like, aptitude, interest, drive, those types of qualities. But what we choose to focus on are, like, superficial things like sex, age, race, because we feel like there's a disparity there because of racism. And to some degree that's true. I mean, you can't argue that people are racist and they do negative things to other, races or cultures or sexes they don't like.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think as society kind of advances and there's less of that, I would say, and I think you can see it, just in the stats, how people behave with each other has been improving for the last 50 years. And I think it'll continue to do so. We got to shift away from this idea of inflating or providing opportunities artificially to groups just based on superficial characteristics, and it's not good for anybody, I don't think, in the long term.
Yeah. Yeah, but with that said too, I mean, when you look at social media, I mean, there's people making livings out of superficial things
right.
too, right?
The superficial world, that's a pretty difficult thing to kind of get your head around, but I mean, that's, I think, the right answer in the long run is, just creating opportunities for anybody who, wants to pursue it, or has the drive or ambition to be there. It's less to do with anything else, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's actually where that whole idea of a socialist touch to capitalism needs to step in again, sort of thing too, where it shouldn't be always about the almighty dollar.
Yeah.
It's like we should still be successful, even though we're not, constantly driving, or we don't need the top-notch best things all the time necessarily.
Yeah.
It's like we want to do well, but it's like we still want to be able to hire people to do the work, and it's like, well, we could forego some of the profits just so that we can help the entire country's unemployment rate go down.
Right.
So we can divvy up some of the work, and it's like some of it's going to be boring, and it's not going to feel like you're filling your day properly. But no matter what, you're going to get an 8-hour worth of pay. Mm-hmm. And if it gets to that point where we're starting to see that it's actually becoming detrimental for people to be there for 8 hours, we'll pay them for 8 hours, but they only have to work 6. Mm-hmm. Or like they're starting to do in a lot of European countries, even some American companies, where they're starting 4-day weeks. Mm-hmm. 3-day weekends where people can properly unwind and actually get things done that they can't get done during the week usually.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay, right, because if you want to live a life, your life isn't just about your job.
Yeah.
So if you can enjoy your life, you actually probably are going to enjoy your job more often than too, because they work together better now.
Yeah, that's right.
And your shitty job may not be as bad then either.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think the other thing to keep in mind is that, like we were talking about technology earlier, as technology changes, like our days aren't going to be filled with, 8 hours of repetitive work. Like you're more likely looking at like achieving the same amount of value in like, a quarter or less of the time.
Yeah. Right?
And there's actually a really good book that talks about this called Bullshit Jobs. Have you heard about it? Yeah. You get a chance to read it, recommend it, it's really good. But they talk about basically how kind of the jobs or a lot of the positions or the hours of work that we do today is mostly unnecessary, and a lot of it is just filler, essentially, to kind of keep society moving and getting people paid. But the reality is, like, a very small portion of your day is really ever spent on anything truly valuable. Most of it is just repetitive stuff, right?
Yeah.
For sure, like I've seen that, working in the corporate world for a lot of years is, they fill the days with meetings. I mean, are some of those meetings really necessary? If you look at them, I mean, I guess you got the FaceTime and the social interaction, but like beyond that, there wasn't really a lot of value that came out of there. And you basically spent, 80% of your day in meetings. So to me, like there's definitely some opportunities to be more efficient with our time, and if we just focus on like the productivity side of things, like why couldn't we, future might be 2-hour work days, and you spend the rest of the time just getting that time back.
Oh, I'm off camera. That's all right. No problem. But yeah, that makes sense too. I mean, you have a life to live regardless, and I think whenever you're doing, like filling seats and stuff like that, it's not really helpful for a lot of people that it's like, well, I finished my work by noon today, but I have to sit here until 5.
Right.
Yeah, well, what's the benefit to the company for that? That person has to sit there doing nothing. Mm-hmm. There's all of a sudden infighting because other people see this person sitting around, and it's like, well, it's not my job, or I'm not even allowed to take initiative if I'm in a union to go help somebody else to at least get my day going, so I don't feel like I'm sitting here for forever until the 5 o'clock strikes, sort of thing too. but yeah, like why would they have to sit at that desk when they can go and move on with their day and get the things that they need to get done, taken care of, and do these other things that'll make them feel better about themselves. And I found that for myself this last, basically since the pandemic started. It started really kind of hammering home to me again that I'm very likely not going to make the age that I expect. It's entirely possible that, I mean, I could have an aneurysm and die right now for all I know. Like, life can be taken from any of us at any time. Mm-hmm. So why would I do, like, and I'm pretty sure we talked about this before, is that why would I save for a retirement that I might not even reach?
Right.
Like, I'm living now and enjoying my life now, so I should just be here doing that. Mm-hmm. Right? So I might as well. And the more I think that people are allowed to do that sort of thing, where they're not just stuck in that grind nonstop. If you can go and live your life and you can experience things, or I don't have to keep my kid in daycare as long. Mm-hmm. That's a good thing for me because I get to know my kid better. I don't have to pay somebody else to raise my child for me, right. Sort of thing too. So, and it alleviates stress off some of the daycare workers because, they can't imagine it's the easiest thing taking care of kids all the time either. No. Like there is ways to optimize what we're doing, but I think like the point we made though too is that some of these things are exactly that. It's a matter of optimizing now. They're not real issues even. Mm-hmm. Right? Like how close to perfection can we get? Yeah. Right. So yeah. And it's weird because it's always the human goal is that we strive for perfection or we strive for comfort or we whatever sort of thing. But when we get it, it's like it's not satisfying.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, achievement's going to make your life better, and of course, it never does, right?
Yeah.
You just always want more, or find a way to be dissatisfied with what you've got. That's just the human condition.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think, and again, like we were talking about utopia, where if we even achieve that, would everybody just be complacent? I mean, that's why I don't think they would. Like there's always that. I guess that's the word I'm looking for. Kind of the conundrum, I guess, like humanity is that, like, even when we think we've achieved, perfection, we're always seeking something more, right?
Yeah.
So I think that would be the case, like even if we got to the state where nobody, like even physical wealth wasn't really a thing, well, what becomes a thing? Then it just becomes, how do we improve society or improve things beyond our society or other worlds or whatever, right? So yeah. I do think that vision of, I guess like Star Trek was kind of the one that, I think of that really first propagated that, but I think that's probably correct,
Yeah, but even with that said though too, I mean, Gene Roddenberry's idea of what the future was nice, and more often than not, it's like, well, humans kind of have their shit together, it seems like. Mm-hmm. But then they go to these other planets, and yeah, like the race one that they'd done where, yeah, this half is black, this half is white for some people, but it was the opposite for the other people, and it's like, well, you guys are all the same. No, I have black on the left half. He has white on the left half. He's completely different than me.
Yeah.
It's like, well, okay, this is basically the same shit we were dealing with like centuries ago.
Yeah.
But it's like at the same time though too, I mean, it was groundbreaking. And it's like, yeah, we can have all these things that are working together sort of thing like that. But then the newer versions of Star Trek shows started coming out and it starts peeling back the layers of what Starfleet's all about and what societies and stuff like that and those futures. And it's like, things aren't as squeaky clean as maybe Gene Roddenberry talked, because the reality of things are, it's that a lot of things that are alive live in some kind of a hierarchy.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the other part too, is that...
Well, there's that, and people just naturally seek out hierarchies, right? Like...
Well, I think life does in general,
yeah.
Like so, everything that we see, like... Well, I mean, yeah, we always make that point, is that everything that's alive consumes something else to stay alive.
Yeah.
It's just a fact of what life is. Mm-hmm. I mean, by definition, fire is alive.
Yeah.
Right, so...
Yeah, and I mean, I guess Gene Roddenberry glazed over that, but I mean... Yeah, there was still a hierarchy to the Enterprise, right? Like you think of the starships and stuff. I mean, you had the captain. And
Well, yeah, it was all still military. I mean, it was
Yeah,
scientific vessel, but it was
very top down, right?
yeah, very military way of running it
Yeah,
there.
which is interesting.
Yeah, but I mean, that's also part of, I think also the important part of discipline. Like, sometimes compliance is necessary. You know, and people, well, a lot of people that are allowed to do whatever the fuck they want, usually are the ones that are the biggest problems.
All right.
You know, because they didn't learn discipline. They didn't learn to maybe just listen instead of talk.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like there's a lot of these things that it's, well, how does that saying go? Like, make them guess without saying anything of your intelligence instead of opening your mouth and removing the question of how smart you actually are.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, so you can say a lot more without saying anything at all a lot of the time. So
Yeah.
that when you do say something, it becomes more interesting and more profound or whatever. I mean, it doesn't always work out that way. And sometimes the only thing you ever say, put your own foot in your mouth kind of thing too.
That's
but
right too, yeah.
but I mean, at the same time though too, I think as a rule for a lot of stuff, and I think for me, I think is when I start to get overly emotional or opinionated about stuff, like I've been for the last, whatever, 2 hours.
It's just been one long-running opinion,
Yeah.
basically.
But I mean, at the same time though too, it's something that I think I've taken enough time to form these opinions, and I'm also one of the first people that admit that I'm wrong. I try to be, at least anyways, when I can, because I know that I'm not right about everything all the time, and I also know that the worlds and information and opinions and stuff change all the time too, because everything we do is change.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so I think that's a good thing about our evolution of knowledge and stuff like that too, and I think that's where a lot of our knowledge and our working together moving forward is always important.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's been a big stopping block in a lot of sense, where we're working against each other for a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But again, pressure makes diamonds.
Yeah.
Right? Every time there's a struggle, it forces us to work harder to do better and be better.
Yeah.
Right? So it's always, and I mean, I guess that's kind of part of the human experience, is that we're walking contradictions.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I think, like the struggle doesn't always have to be, as negative as we think it does. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be, people going to war, or like, race war, whatever it is.
Yeah.
The struggle can be mostly like just interpersonal in some ways, I guess. Like,
Well, and healthy competition, not destructive or
that's right.
aggressive kind
That's
of
what
thing.
I'm thinking of. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like healthy competition. So, and I think like we see evidence that people get driven by that now anyway, right? Like, people with all the resources in the world, like we're talking about Elon Musk.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if he wanted to quit, he could have quit when he had PayPal and just lived on a deserted island the rest of his life. Well, why didn't he?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he had everything he could want. So was it really just he was greedy and wanted all these billions? I don't think so. I don't think it had anything to do with money. I think he just really wanted to affect some change, right?
Yeah.
And was motivated enough to, accept taking on all the work and responsibility to be able to do that. So I think, there's going to be a large portion of, humanity that's going to fit into that box once they're not worried about, where their next meal is going to come from, or, who's going to break into their house and steal all their stuff. So, I guess I'm optimistic in that way. I don't think we necessarily need the strife in the traditional sense, I guess, to, progress, but, it has seemed to have been a catalyst in the past, but I think it was only because, like the resources or the time you spent focusing on those advancements was limited as a function of just surviving, the day-to-day. So that's what I think. And then, like wartime really, just because we had to beat the enemy, right, really put a lot of people in the position that they hadn't been before, where they had all of these resources focused on, specific goals, which were mostly just advancements in technology.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's going to become a product of, these things we're talking about, just new technologies, artificial intelligence, machines doing more things, just naturally that it's going to replace the strife, I think, in the sense that we don't need the strife to focus our efforts. We'll just have the resources available to do it, sort of thing.
Yeah, well, and hopefully with, I mean, a more evened education and everybody being educated to like a bit minimum standard, and then further education being easily accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that instead of, well, a lot of that learned helplessness that we all kind of seem to get some aspect of, we'll all start to see those things that need optimizing, and we won't need to ask permission, or we'll go in and say, it's like, okay, well, nobody's really worked on this aspect of a computer yet.
Right.
So how do we make this part of it better? Or this part of food production hasn't really been looked at or thought about or upgraded in the last 30 years. Like,
Yeah,
why are we
exactly.
still watering things this way?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so and I think that's kind of cool too. I agree with that. But I mean, that's also, I think, with the idea of how if we do start to build, well, even moon colonies, it's going to be difficult to build anything there. But it's like, well, if we build domes and we start understanding hydroponics better and in different ways, we find out certain things that we can do there. And then it's like, well, will this work in a full gravity area? Or is it because this is on the moon, things do things differently here? Or can we use some of the things that we found out by doing a colony on the moon to apply how that works on the Earth? And then, yeah, utilizing that technology together to bring all of society up in a certain way.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, I think it would be nice if we could all kind of just work towards that goal of making everything better. But there's also enough people that do it for themselves, I guess, too, is part of it. That kind of slows it down to a degree, but I mean, I don't know, like, and that's not even necessarily a bad thing, because it's always that competition, that healthy competition, and that's, well, like sports. I mean, I think same idea with sports is that it's a good, healthy competition to do more than just put points on the board. You know, and having that idea, like you said, it was the same idea with meetings and stuff. It's like, well, maybe this isn't just to discuss ideas. This is actually so we have FaceTime for each other, because maybe there's been enough psychologists say if somebody's in a cubicle all day long and they don't actually interface with people, that's actually going to make them feel more alone than anything.
Right.
So if we actually put more people into meetings where they can actually look and talk to each other, and maybe it ends up not even really being about work anymore.
Yeah.
But it's, yeah, like you say, the function of actually humanizing the work that we're doing.
That's right, yeah. That's a good point. You know, I was always quick to throw the meetings under the bus, but I'm sure there's some like psychological benefit to actually interacting with, you know, people that I'm probably undervaluing. But I think my challenge with it is that, you know, I think that portion of it can be abstracted away from the work to a large degree, you know what I mean? Like the decision-making piece of it, I think, yeah, you know, I think that's where the high value contributing to society portion comes in. But the fact that we have kind of artificial, you know, social interactions while at work, I think is really just a replacement for, you know, interacting with people that, you know, you want to interact with, like your friends, and like we're doing right now, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of my thought on it. And I could be wrong, and I know I understand it's a way to do business, but...
No, I get that though, and that even as I was saying it, it's just like, do I actually agree with that? Because I know for myself, it's like, do you want me to sit here and spin my wheels, or do you want me to save you money and my time so I can go do the things that I want?
That's right, yeah.
Instead,
That's
sort
right.
of thing too, but it's like at the same time, it's like, well, no, I should maybe make an effort to like the people I work with.
Yeah, and there's something you said for that. Like if you have friends at work, you know, it does help your productivity quite a bit.
Yeah.
And even like friendly competition helps a lot. You know, just motivates you to be better. And I think that those are good things to do. I just don't think that it needs to take up 80% of our day. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I don't think we need that many meetings to talk about things. I think ideas can be exchanged in other more efficient ways, and
Yeah.
you know, the social piece of it, I think, or the interactions piece can take on other forms.
Yeah. Yeah, but I guess that's the whole thing about being human, is that well, and being an adult more than anything, I guess, too, is that there are some things that you don't want to do, but you got to do them anyways.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, and it's like, it's frustrating and shitty, but it's like, if I put a smile on my face when I've done it, because I've accomplished something, it's like, isn't that a better thing anyways? You know, like, are you going to be closer with one of your brothers that you haven't seen for a while when you're going out to a family reunion? Or you're going to be closer to your cousin because you rode out in the vehicle with him, you had a flat tire and things turned into a shit show, and then you ended up spending 3 hours with this person that you hardly knew.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden you got really close with your cousin.
Right.
And it's like, maybe these bad times are actually a good thing once in a while.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right, because it builds a lot of camaraderie and stuff then too, and I think, well, and I know the military actually utilizes that kind of stuff. I mean, that's why they put people in teams and platoons and stuff like that too. It's because you're not a one-man army.
Mm-hmm.
You have to rely on other people, and the more you rely on other people, it's like the analogy of the hand. Like, each finger is never going to be strong individually as the whole hand is going to be together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the idea of the military, is that we'll always be stronger together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, everybody's, benefits from everyone else's, strengths,
Yeah.
I guess, to some degree.
That's always think it's funny when people say they're a loner. It's like, you live in a city.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, like, I guess the saying is, what, no man is an island, right? And that's true. And it's, it's difficult, to someone like me, like, I'm more introverted, I guess, in a lot of ways. But, as you get older, you kind of just realize it's just much more efficient, and, you can have a much better time just leveraging other people to help you than, just trying to take everything on yourself. So, for sure,
Right.
I would agree. I think people together, are generally much better.
Yeah, I agree with that, man. Well, we are
Yeah.
2 hours fully in. How you feeling?
Yeah, good. I
Yeah.
guess, how much longer do you want
I think we could probably wrap her up and get into some cake.
to? Alright, sounds good.
Right on, man.
Cool.
Well, appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thanks a lot.
no worries, man.
That was
Hopefully
awesome.
was helpful.
Yeah. Honestly, it's just getting into conversation feels good.
Yeah,
It's-
exactly.
It's nice to be able to sit down and have some intellectual stuff go through your mind once in a while.
Especially with Rona and everything else.
Oh, yeah. Caw-caw!